Hello, everyone. A little. It's okay. I'm back. Hello. Thank you all for joining us today. It's wonderful to be back at the center. Excuse me while I just adjust Zoom. So it's been a few weeks since I've been here, been more than 4 weeks. The Venerable Namjong has done some classes recently, so I hope those who are able to attend those enjoyed them. And we did have class 2 weeks ago. It was online only. So it's nice to be back in Bangalore, even though it is a little warm here, a little warmer here than it is in Balakuba. It's okay. I'm very grateful to be here with all of you. So let's take a moment to settle into our space and whatever worldly activities we have been up to today, whatever running around we've been doing, we can put all of that to the side so we can be fully present together here. Create a sacred space for ourselves where we can study and practice the Dharma in a meaningful way. And once we've set this boundary for ourselves, we have set this intentionality, we can also generate a strong motivation that the reason we are studying Dharma together this afternoon, the reason we're studying and practicing the Dharma in general, is not simply so that we might improve our lives right now, but so that we might develop the techniques and the wisdom and the skills necessary to be of greater service to other sentient beings in this and in all future lives. And to that end, we have the goal of attaining perfect complete Buddhahood, not for our own benefit alone, but so that we might be of maximum benefit to other sentient beings. So take a moment to set that strong motivation that the reason for study and practice here now is not simply for your own benefit, but so that you might be of maximum benefit to others. And it's okay to recognize that we'll benefit in the process, that we'll find more peace, more contentment in this life. That just isn't the primary goal. So set that strong motivation, and we'll offer some preliminary prayers. So those who have the gold prayer book, they'll go to page 36, I believe. Sorry, 34. So we'll offer refuge and bodhicitta 3 times in Tibetan and then once in English. And then we'll continue with the other prayers in English. Shiran soki chonam la jantu baru dagdi kyapsu chi dagi jinsogi pe sonam vi drola pinche sange jo parsho sange shiran soki chonam la jantu baru dagdi kyapsu chi dagi jinsogi pe sonam vi drola pinche sange jo parsho Sange Cheran Soki Chonam La Kyanshu Baru Dagni Kyapsun Ki Dagi Jinsogi Pesonam Mi Chola Pinche Sange Jopar Sho. And go for refuge and time and light to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and I rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. Now we'll offer short mandala offering. We'll offer this twice, once in Tibetan and then once in English. Sa me te do ke This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and I offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Purana Mandala Kam Niryataya. We'll continue with offering praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. It's on page 73. The founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme God of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme God of human beings, be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakti clan, I prostrate, and make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme God of human beings, to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakti clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, forms supremely pure, wisdom ocean like the golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to lessness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts. To you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all three ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bound in bodies as many as all realms, atoms, in all aspects. With supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all seas, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. We'll continue with the heart circle. I prostrate to the Arya triple gem. Thus did I hear at one time, the Bhagavan was dwelling on Mount mountain in Rajagriha together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya of Lokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, and not deficient, not unfulfilled, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomena. There is no eye element, and so on up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on up to and including no aging and death, no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance upon the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequal, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering should be known as the truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Tadyata om gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhi swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva should train the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya of Lokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated, and even the Tathagatas rejoice. Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya of Lokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that which had been spoken by the Bhagavan. Lastly, we'll offer the prayer to the lion-faced Dakini to help overcome and avoid obstacles to our time together today. I prostrate to the gathering of Dakinis and the three chakras who abide in the holy yoga of using space. By your powers of clairvoyance and magical emanation, look after practitioners like a mother her only child. Akasamarata Shadara Samaraya Pe Akasamarata Shadara. Akasamurata Shadara Samaraya Etayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Swaha. By the teaching of the three supreme jewels possessing the power of truth, may inner and outer hindrances be transformed. May they be dispelled. May they be pacified. Chintam Kuriya Swaha. May all negative forces opposed to Dharma be completely pacified. May the host of 80,000 obstacles be pacified. May we be separated from problems and harmful conditions to Dharma. May all enjoyments be in accord with the Dharma. And may there be auspiciousness and perfect happiness here, right now. Great. Thank you so much. So as we begin our class today, let us bring to mind, as Tsongkhapa explicitly teaches in the middle length Lamrim, what is the correct way to listen to a teaching, to receive teachings. One of the ways is to avoid the three faults of a faulty vessel. So you want to avoid being like a pot that is upside down, which is to say we want to be open and receptive, open-minded. We want to avoid being like a pot that is stained and unclean, which is to say we want to not have any prejudice when we begin a teaching or when we participate in a teaching. We don't want to have any baggage. We don't want to be cynical. And we want to avoid being like a pot that has a hole in it, which is to say we want to be attentive and not forgetful, not allow ourselves to succumb to distraction as it may be. So these three characteristics of being open-minded, receptive, non-prejudiced, and attentive, we want to cultivate those every time we engage in Dharma study or practice, and especially when we receive the teachings of any sort. So it's good to be back, as I said. We did have 1 week off from our class. It feels longer because it's been so long since I've been to Bangalore, but it's only been 1 week break from this class. As usual, you can ask questions at any time, and I'll do my best to answer them. So there'll be hopefully some time at the end for questions as well. As I always say, one of our main goals of studying this text, especially, is we want to learn how to integrate study and practice together. One of the beautiful aspects of the Lamrim texts is that the whole purpose of them is organizing the teachings of the Buddha in such a way that we can see how they connect to each other, and then we can put them into practice so they build on one another, right? So studying them and practicing them go hand in hand. And now I would argue that we should try to adopt that attitude with every text we study, though it's much harder with deep philosophical texts sometimes, right? But especially texts like the Lamrim texts. Their whole purpose is to teach us how to practice. And now some Lamrim texts are very technical and some are very experiential. For instance, Pabonk Rinpoche's Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, which is a commentary on the Lamrim, that is an experiential Lamrim text, right? So when you study that, it's almost easier to practice it because it's taught in an experiential way. The middle length Lamrim is a balance between experiential and kind of intellectual, right? But it's our job when we engage in the act of study or the act of hearing, as it may be, that we engage in that act in such a way as to say, now, how do I put this into practice, right? If we're just studying this to improve our intellect, then, that's not bad, but it's not the most beneficial aspiration we could have. So as we study, we want to be focused on putting our study into practice. We have to go through the process of study, contemplation, and meditation, right? That integrates whatever we learn into our everyday life. So study is to receive new information or to learn information over it again, right? You may have already studied all these topics, but by doing it again and again, you are learning new things. And then contemplation means working out all your doubts, developing confidence in the teachings, developing
not just confidence, but a level of certainty, right? And then meditation is taking that certainty and making it inseparable from your own mind, and then as a result of that, from your practice. And these three activities of study, contemplation, and meditation, they work together hand in hand. Right? We should always be trying to develop all three of them in a cycle. It isn't like we complete the study and then we move on, and then we complete the contemplation, and then we move on and meditate. Right? Every topic we study, there are ways to engage in an analytical practice that will use all three of these types of engagement. And then once we have some analytical understanding, some analytical conceptual understanding, then we can engage in meditation on it that is non-analytical and that can allow it to be more deeply felt and realized. So these three, as I often say, are the bridge between our intellectual understanding and our experiential understanding. And so when we engage in a text like Lamrim Dream, the middle length Lamrim, it is specifically to help us, to guide us how to do this connection between intellectual and experiential. So with that said, I thought we'd do a quick review of where we are in the text. First off, a reminder that this text is one of Tsongkhapa's 5 texts on emptiness that we are encouraged to study. Of the 5, it is the 4th one, chronologically, and His Holiness Dalai Lama advises that we recognize the chronology of them because Tsongkhapa's way of teaching and explaining emptiness became more refined across the 5 texts. So the first text is the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment, which Tsongkhapa composed in 1402. And then it is Drane de Chingpo, so the essence of eloquence regarding interpretive and definitive speech, and that was composed in 1407. And then Sashe Tichen, so the commentary on Nagarjuna's fundamental verses of Madhyamaka, of the middle, the fundamental verses known as wisdom, and that was composed in 1408. And then this text, the middle length Lamrim, which was composed in 1415. And then the last one is Gompa Rapsa, clarifying the intention, which is Tsongkhapa's commentary on the Madhyamaka Avatar by Chandrakirti, and that was composed in 1418. So for our purposes now, that won't come until much later in the text. So he discusses emptiness a little bit here and there throughout the text, but the main section of emptiness is going to come in the discussion of the practice of the perfection of wisdom, which is the last of the 6 perfections. So it's right near the end. But it's still important to keep the text in context, to understand that. And so the outline of the text, as we began our text, we studied the greatness of the author, here pointing to Atisha. And the reason for that was to create a sense or a recognition of the validity of these teachings and an inspiration to find meaning in these teachings. And then next was the greatness of the teachings themselves, not just Atisha's teachings, but more specifically the teachings of the Buddha. And he especially emphasized the 2 greatnesses of the teachings. So what are the 2 greatnesses that we're meant to remember or emphasize?
Non-contradictory. Non-contradictory.
Oh, I can't hear very well online. Okay. Let me see if the volume can be turned up here. Sorry. Oh, that's fine.
Non-contradictory.
Okay, there we go. Yes.
Non-contradictory.
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 That's right. All the teachings of the Buddha are non-contradictory. And then?
Personal instructions.
Exactly. Personal instruction. So what Tsongkhapa emphasized is that all the teachings that the Buddha taught don't contradict, even though the words might contradict, right? That the Buddha taught different students at different times with different mental and emotional dispositions. And he taught using different techniques to guide everyone closer to Buddhahood, right? That was the goal. And so if we take all of the Buddhist teachings at face value alone, then some of the words might seem to contradict. But when we look at the intention of all the Buddhist teachings, we realize that there's no contradiction because the intention of all the Buddhist teachings are to guide students to achieve Buddhahood, right? Eventual Buddhahood. It may be the teachings are pointing towards individual liberation, or pointing towards Buddhahood, depending on who his disciples were that he was giving these teachings to. But all the teachings converge on that same meaning. So there's no contradiction in meaning. And then secondly, all the teachings of the Buddha are to be taken as personal instruction. For me, this is one of the most powerful parts of the teaching. I try to remember this every time I engage with any teaching, whether it's a sutra, whether it's a commentary, whether it is a teaching from one of my teachers, whether it's just a discussion of a text with one of my teachers, whatever it is, all of these teachings are meant to be personal instruction. So if I open my mind up in such a way that I receive this text as personal instruction, then it's, at least from my experience, it speaks to me much more immediately than if I think, oh, this is a text that was composed in 1415. That was 600 years ago. It probably has something to do with my life, but not that much. That attitude doesn't help me. But if I say, this is Tsongkhapa telling me how to live my life, this is Tsongkhapa teaching me what it means to walk the path towards Buddhahood, teaching me specifically, that attitude transforms how I relate to the text, right? And so for me, that's very powerful. So I encourage us to remember that. Every teaching should be taken as personal advice, especially the teachings of the Buddha, but any teaching we engage in. Then after discussing the greatness of the author, we next discussed how to properly rely on a spiritual friend, right? On a guru. And, in English, we call this guru devotion. But in Tibetan, we literally say lama tensu, the proper way of relying upon or depending upon a lama or a teacher, right? So the meaning is essentially the same. But sometimes the word devotion, it can be misconstrued a little. Because the purpose of a teacher isn't for us to lift them up, right? We rely on a teacher, a guru, to guide us to Buddhahood. So when you use that language, it becomes more clear what is the purpose of having a guru. It isn't that you could have an image you could put on your altar, right? That's not the purpose of having a guru. The purpose of having a guru is having the support you need to propel you to Buddhahood, and the support you need when you make mistakes to hold you up, to lift you back up, right? That's the purpose of a guru. So we need to learn how to rely upon a guru correctly. Just being devoted is not enough, right? So that's a language issue, but we have to be careful of the language we use because our language can affect the way we think about things. So guru devotion is a fine term, but we have to remember the purpose of having a guru isn't just so we can have a shiny image on our altar, or that when we visualize our merit field, we have more individuals. The purpose of having a guru, being devoted to a teacher, is having an object upon which we rely that will help us to Buddhahood and will lift us, support us out of the swamp of samsara. And so when we talked about how to properly rely on a guru, there were 3 different classifications. So how do you identify a proper guru? You could identify the best way, a guru that has these 10 qualifications, right? Which include such things as being disciplined, having achieved high levels of realization, understanding emptiness, having a good heart is one of the most important ones, being skilled or rich in scripture, being never getting disheartened in explaining the teachings, always exerting effort to meet the students where they are, and so forth, being eloquent, being loving and kind. But then Tsongkhapa says, it's very difficult to find a teacher with all 10 of those qualities. So then he says the medium would be to find a teacher that has at least 5 qualities. And those 5 qualities are a teacher that is skilled in the 3 higher trainings. So the higher training of concentration, of morality, and of wisdom, as well as who has an understanding of emptiness and who has a loving and kind heart. So a teacher with those 5 would be the middle kind of teacher to rely upon. Then he says, even these days, and now mind you, these days was the 15th century, but I think the same goes for us. These days, it may be difficult to find teachers that even have all 5 of those, in which case, what we need to identify in a teacher is a teacher that has more good qualities than they have bad qualities, and has more good qualities than we have. Those are the 2 critical things. A teacher should have a better understanding and more good qualities than we have, and they should have more good qualities than bad qualities in whole. And that just kind of makes sense, right? Like that is common sense. The important thing about that, I think, is that we can realize that not all of our teachers are going to fulfill every single need we have. And so, as an example, a teacher studied for many years in Suvarna, Sumatra, right? Golden Isle. And his teacher there, we say, was not Madhyamaka. He studied the Yogacara tradition, or he believed the Yogacara tenets. However, he was a teacher's primary teacher of compassion and bodhicitta, right? He didn't teach a teacher emptiness because his interpretation of what emptiness and selflessness meant doesn't line up with the Madhyamaka interpretation. However, his teachings on bodhicitta were so powerful that he was a teacher's primary teacher of bodhicitta. He also had two teachers in India, but his primary one was from Suvarna, right? The man from Suvarna, they call him. So our teachers don't have to be everything for us. So you might have teachers who are incredible meditators and have incredible kind hearts, and having them as a teacher shows you how to live in the world. And they may not show the aspect of being incredible scholars, right? They may not show the aspect of being great debaters, right? However, they show the skillful means aspect really strongly. And therefore, what you're getting from that teacher might be how to encourage, to accumulate merit through practice of skillful means, which is to say how to generate compassion, bodhicitta, and how to live that bodhicitta realization in your everyday life. And there are other teachers who may be incredibly skilled in wisdom and debate, and they might have realizations of all seven wisdoms, right? Fast wisdom and quick wisdom and all these things. Wisdom in composition and so on. And that teacher, they may be gruff. They may be a little coarse around their students. They may be very cutting. And they may not be the teacher you need to teach you how to live compassion. Right? And so that teacher might be giving you something else. So yes, we want a root teacher, ideally. And a root teacher, especially, we see them as a Buddha, and we recognize them as teaching us as a Buddha would teach us. However, we can have more than one teacher, and we realize that when we depend on a teacher, that teacher, as long as they have more good qualities than bad qualities, and they have more qualities than us, they have something they can teach us. And it may not be everything, right? So then we learn how to properly rely on a guru. And then we discuss the preliminary practices for a meditation session in the context of a retreat, or often just in the context of meditating every day, having 4 sessions a day, and whatever the topic is we're meditating on. So in this case, since this is the beginning of the text, it is using meditating on how to rely on a teacher as your meditative object. But then for every meditation session, we talk about the 6 preliminary activities, right? Which include cleaning the room and arranging representations of the body, speech, and mind of the Buddha, and then laying out offerings, and then adopting a both physical and mental position or posture. So the physical posture would be a meditation posture that is comfortable and appropriate, and the mental posture would be a mind that goes for refuge and develops a mind of bodhicitta. And then we would visualize the merit field in front of us, which is to say all of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, as well as all the lineage holders in our tradition, especially related to whatever topic we're meditating on, all of whom are in the aspect of our root guru, or all of whom are emanations of our root guru. And then we offer the 7-limb prayer as a way of accumulating merit, purifying negativities, and multiplying whatever merit we've accumulated. And then lastly, we offer a mandala as a way of requesting all the blessings of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas before we engage in that meditation session. So as the preliminary activities before any meditation session. Now, if you're in a retreat session, arguably you wouldn't do all of those before every session. Some you'd only do in the first session of the day and so on. But in any case, we learned those are the components of a meditation session. And even if we're not in retreat, we should strive to recognize what is the reason those are taught as the 6 components for an effective meditation session, and how to bring that into our everyday life, even if we're not sitting for 4 meditation sessions a day, right? And then the next thing, which Captain Lamrim Rinpoche always emphasizes, is how to behave in between your meditation sessions. He says, it's very easy to have a mind focused on Dharma when you're in a meditation session. But then in between sessions, it's very easy to get a visa to the hell realms, is how Lama Zopa Rinpoche would put it, because it's very easy to let your mind wander away from Dharma. So how important it is throughout all of our everyday activities, when we're not explicitly sitting down to focus on a Dharma practice, to keep our mind oriented towards Dharma and oriented towards virtue, right? Because if we don't keep our mind oriented towards virtue, then it won't become a habit. And if it doesn't become a habit, then we're going to fall back onto all of our negative habits that have kept us circling in samsara since the beginning of this time, right? Due to the power of all of our delusions and the imprints of our delusions. And then finally, after learning how to rely on a guru, we say, okay, now that you properly know how to rely on a teacher, how, based on that reliance, do you engage in spiritual practice? And that brought us to our first topic, or our next topic, I suppose, which is perfect human rebirth. And that's where we are right now. We're on page 41 of the text, for those who haven't. So we've already gone through, in the perfect human rebirth, the categories, or the outline for this is to identify what are the leisures and the endowments of a perfect human rebirth, then to consider the great value of those leisures and endowments, and then to consider the difficulty in achieving those leisures and endowments. Right? And then after that will be how to actually take the essence of those, of a perfect human rebirth. So here are the leisures, also called the freedoms. There are 8 of them. And the endowments, which are also sometimes called the richnesses, are 10 in number. And as we discussed last time, these kind of overlap for the most part. However, we separate them out. And the reason for that is because even if they are pointing to the same object, the chance to meditate on it from 2 different angles is useful, right? It's always beneficial to study the same topic from more than one perspective. And it may seem redundant, but once you do it, it just takes the right opportunity for all the things to fall in place for you, right? So you may be studying something from one direction over and over and over again, and you understand it, but you understand it intellectually. Then as soon as you look at that same thing from the other side, something clicks, something rearranges. It's hard to explain, but it's really wonderful when it happens. And so the reason there is repetition or redundancy is not just for us to memorize, but it is so we have the opportunity to make sure we understand all the dimensions, right? So the fact that we are endowed with something and we're free from something, even if they're pointing at the same thing, they're understanding it in different ways. An example of this for me, why it's useful to be studying something from more than one perspective. My first year studying monastery, right? You learn this concept of, and when you study debate, a lot of the language you use isn't like colloquial Tibetan, right? So you have to learn specific terminology. And one term we use is called, in Tibetan, is dun chik, which means mutually inclusive, right? Dun actually means meaning, and chik is one or the same. So things have the same meaning. And so the instinct is to think of that as meaning they're synonymous. And you say, such as impermanent phenomena and compounded phenomena are mutually inclusive. When you say, well, they're synonymous, okay, right? That means the same thing. And there is a way to something that is din chig, 2 phenomena that are din chig, mutually inclusive, meet the 8 pathways of being mutually inclusive. So if something is one thing, then it has to be the other. If A exists, B exists. If A doesn't exist, B doesn't exist. And if something is not A, then it's not B. And then the reverse of those, right? That's the 8 doorways of mutual inclusivity. So in my mind, I'm thinking of this concept as being meaning synonymous, right? And then you get to the section that says, so sure, impermanence and compounded phenomena are synonymous. That's fine, that makes sense. But then you say cause and result are dunchik. Cause and result are mutually inclusive. And you say, well, wait a second. Cause and result are not synonymous, right? And so then I had to really think about, what does it mean for something to be mutually inclusive? And what does it mean to be dunchik, to have the same meaning? How can cause and result have the same meaning? And so this term, I'd been using it for months already until I got to this one topic that all of a sudden it made me rethink what that term meant and how I could understand that term and applying it to understanding nature, the world around me, right? And understanding what I was studying. And so that one opportunity to explore that term and its meaning changed the way I understood it. Even though I've been studying it for months, and that term comes up over and over and over again, and we were debating, that's a very important term because I might be making an argument about something being impermanent, and you might accept that, but then you may not accept it being compounded. And then I have the tool in my toolkit. Well, it has to be this because if it is impermanent, it has to be compounded, and so on, right? It's all about examining the relationship between different phenomena, right? So I've been using this term over and over and over again, but it wasn't until this one particular topic came up that it clicked for me and it made more sense and I understood it. And part of that was because it's not in my primary language, but also part of that is because the term Dunjik isn't like a term that Tibetans go around saying. So even my classmates, it's not like they have an innate understanding of it. They know the words mean, but how two phenomena are mutually inclusive, they had to study the same way a non-Tibetan speaker had to. And it wasn't until I studied it from a different perspective using a different object that I understood it. So in the same way that we study the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments, they may be overlapping in what they're pointing at, but they're looking at it from different perspectives. And the reason for that is to help us understand it more fully. And so the 8 freedoms, right? There are 4 freedoms that have to do with the unfree states of humans, and then 4 freedoms, the non-human unfree states. So obviously the 4 non-human unfree states that we're free from is we're free from being reborn as a hell being, a hungry ghost, or an animal, or a long life god. So we're free from those unfree states. And the 4 unfree states of a human that we're free from, that we have the freedom of not being born as, or born with, is that we're free from being born in what is called a border land, sometimes translated as a barbarian country, which is essentially saying we're free from being born in a place where we don't have the freedom to engage in a spiritual practice of our own choosing. Then we're free from being born with incomplete faculties, both of body and mind. We are free from being born, or we're free from having innate wrong views, especially the wrong view that says the law of cause and effect does not exist. What's interesting about that one to point out is that that's a changeable one, right? We might have had that view when we were younger, and then through study, we lose that view. So of them, that is a changeable. As is being in a barbarian land, so to speak, is also changeable to some of us sometimes, depending on our circumstances. So not all of these are kind of predestined at the time of your birth. Some of them are malleable, right? And then the last of the non-free human states is being born at a time when no Buddha has appeared. So we're free from that because we live in an age where Buddha has appeared, even if they are not here at this very moment. So this is the 8 freedoms. We're free of these 8 different unfree states. 4 unfree states not relating to human beings, and 4 unfree states relating to human beings. And then the flip side of that is the 10 richnesses, or the 10 endowments that we have received. And so with those, again, there are 5 personal endowments and 5 endowments that are conditioned by others. And so the 5 personal endowments, first, that we're born as a human, and we're born in a central area, which is to say we're born in a place where we do have the freedom and capacity to study a spiritual tradition or practice a spiritual tradition of our choice. And we are born at a time when we're born with unimpaired senses of body and mind. We are born, or we are endowed with, rather, not having any perverted views or deeds, which is to say we haven't engaged in any of the 5 actions of immediate retribution, which is to say killing your mother, killing your father, killing an arhat, causing a schism in the Sangha community, or intentionally drawing blood from a Buddha out of malice. And we have the endowment of having faith in the teachings of the Buddha, or the three scriptural baskets of the Buddha. So those are the 5 personal endowments. We were born human, born in a central place. We were born, or we're endowed with unimpaired senses. We're endowed with a lack of perverted views, and we are endowed with faith in the scriptural teachings of the Buddha as the way to tame and discipline our body, speech, and mind. And then the 5 endowments that are conditioned by others is that we are endowed of being born at a time when a Buddha has emerged. We are endowed with a time when the Buddha has taught, where those teachings have flourished, where there are practitioners who follow those teachings and uphold them, and there are people who have kind and loving minds, which is to say there are people who both teach those teachings, and there are benefactors for the people that are practicing those teachings. So those are the 5 endowments that are conditioned by others. And now, in the Lamrim Chenmo, the great treatise, he points out that of those 5, the latter 4, we don't have them completely, but we have versions of them that are adequate. And then the being endowed with living at a time when a Buddha has emerged, we don't actually have, right? So we are living in an age where a Buddha emerged and taught, but the fact that the Buddha is not actively here now teaching in a supreme emanation body means we don't have that one. Now, not everyone agrees with this. There are some scholars who say, no. That just means the same as the freedom, right? The freedom is if the Buddha has emerged in this age, right? The last of the 4 freedoms that are unfree states of humans, right? The point is, regardless, even if we don't have that one, we have 17 of the 18, right? So we're very fortunate, incredibly fortunate. And so with that, we'll move on to the next section, which is on page 41. And this is a reminder of, we're still in the section of what are the great values of the ledgers and endowments, right? So we first talked about how inappropriate it would be to have them, but to not make use of them, which would mean that we're no better than an animal. So even though we have all these things that animals don't have, the fact that we are not using the preciousness of our human birth in a meaningful way means we're no better than an animal. And then recognizing that having a perfect human rebirth is the best basis upon which to practice Dharma. And then how to train in the essence of a perfect human rebirth, keeping in mind the objectives of achieving virtuous rebirth, positive rebirth, achieving liberation from samsara, and achieving Buddhahood. And then the last of this category is number 4, to reflect upon the inappropriateness of returning empty-handed, given that not only ultimate, but also temporary objectives are easily accomplished, right? So this is reminding us that even though it doesn't feel like it sometimes, we have the capacity to achieve both temporary and ultimate goals in a way that no other type of rebirth does, right? It may feel like everything is against us and everything is really difficult. And I definitely feel that way sometimes, that there's nothing but obstacle after obstacle. However, even with that feeling, we have to remember that that may be true, that we have this experience of obstacles, yet our ability to overcome those obstacles and to actually achieve worldly goals as well as super mundane goals is, infinitely vast compared to any being who isn't born with the same level of freedom and endowment that we have. So Tsongkhapa says, thus, you should also consider the method that allows you to easily accomplish, by means of this basis, which is to say this body, the causes, giving, ethics, patience, and so on, of an excellent body of high status, excellent resources, and an excellent retinue, which are greatly meaningful not only from an ultimate, but also from a temporary point of view. If you do not apply yourself day and night to the causes of the two objectives by means of this greatly meaningful basis, it would seem like returning empty-handed from an island of precious jewels. So what he's reminding us here, the analogy is, if you go on this incredibly dangerous sea journey, you have to face off with sea monsters and pirates and all of the things you can imagine. Or maybe, climate change brings you all these hurricanes. Then you get to this island that is made of jewels, and then you turn around and leave. You don't take anything with you. Like, what a waste, right? That's the same. If you think of how difficult it is to achieve this human body, think of the necessary causes that it takes, and yet we don't make use of it. That is the same equivalent. So he's pointing out causes here. He says giving, ethics, patience, and so on. In general, we say there are three primary causes to achieve a perfect human rebirth, right? The first one is pure morality. It's really important to have pure morality, to engage in the accumulation of merit through activities such as generosity, and to make stainless prayers. Obviously, any practice that accumulates merit with the intention to eventually become a Buddha will lead us to perfect human rebirth, right? If that is the most appropriate basis for us due to our level of realization. However, those three things are incredibly important because having a perfect human rebirth that has all of the necessities of this life will make continuing to practice Dharma in the future that much easier. And those are the three core causes for that. So then the next point is to then say, if we think it is so important to have perfect human rebirth, and we should be constantly practicing to make sure that we have one again in the future so our practice can continue and deepen, and we want to value this human rebirth, then we should think of how difficult it is to achieve. And as a result of that, we think of the difficulty of achieving all 8 ledgers and 10 endowments. So that's the next section. And this itself has 6 points. The first one is an illustration of the difficulty of finding the ledgers and the endowments. So in the basis of scriptural transmission, it says that beings who die and migrate from the lower realms and the happy realms to the lower realms, from the lower realms and the happy realms to the lower realms, are like dust of the great earth. And the beings who are born from there into the happy realms are like dust taken up with the tip of a fingernail. So it's this is very wordy. If you look at all of the beings who are born in a lower realm, and then from a lower realm, remain in a lower realm in their next rebirth, as well as all the beings who are in an upper realm, which is, say, human, demigod, or god, but then their next rebirth is in a lower realm. All of those beings, it is like the sand or the dust of the entire earth, as opposed to the beings who are in a lower realm and then take birth into an upper realm. That's like the amount of sand on the fingernail, right? So that's showing that the likelihood is that small. There's so many more beings being reborn into a lower realm from different causes, from the cause of from a lower realm to a lower realm, or from a higher realm to a lower realm. That number of beings is vastly, almost incountably more than beings born in an upper realm. Therefore, precious human rebirths are difficult to find from both happy and lower realms. So then number 2, why is it difficult? The reasons why it is difficult to find ledgers and endowments. If you wonder just why are they so difficult to find, it says in Aryadeva's 400 stanzas, for the most part, people fully embrace the side that is unholy. Consequently, common beings mostly go to the lower realms. Basically, most beings aren't practicing virtue, right? And that includes human beings, and that probably includes a lot of us. If we think about all the activities we do throughout our day, how many of our activities are we explicitly pointing towards virtue? And how many of them are governed instead by one of the 8 worldly concerns, by our self-cherishing mind? Or even just disinterest, right? Even it may not be guided by non-virtue, but it's just not guided by virtue, right? And so because of that, even those of us who are trying to practice, we see, due to the imprints of our delusions in past lives and the active delusions and their seeds in our continuum right now, it's very easy to be distracted from virtue, right? That's not because we're bad people. That's because samsara is difficult. It's very easy to be distracted from virtue, even for those of us who are making a serious effort at practicing. And so, recognizing how difficult it is, then it makes sense that most people, or most beings, we use the term people to translate the Tibetan term ganzak, which means basically any sentient being as well as any Buddha is a person. So whenever I say people, I really mean any type of living being. Most people don't spend their day dedicated to virtue, and they engage in more non-virtuous activities, or at least neutral activities, than they do virtuous activities, right? Due to the imprints of their past delusions and their manifest delusions in this continuum, which is to say the fundamental ignorance that keeps causing us to misunderstand the nature of reality. And instead of reacting to reality as it exists, we react to what we project upon reality out of our own ignorance. We follow our attachment, we follow our anchor, and instead of engaging with what is really in front of us, we engage with our own delusions. And as a result of that ignorance, we keep cycling in samsara. We have to exert effort to break free from that cycle. So that's what this verse from the 400 stanzas is saying. And so Kampa says, accordingly, there are many humans and other beings who mostly hold on to the side of the 10 non-virtues, and that is also why, consequently, they go to the lower realms. Furthermore, if for each moment of anger and the like toward a bodhisattva, you have to spend 1 eon in the hell without respite, the negativities accumulated over many lifetimes, which have not come to fruition nor been overcome by the antidotes, and which are present in your own continuum, will doubtlessly cause you to spend many eons in the lower realms. So he's reminding us that never mind this life, maybe we are practicing virtue in this life, but we have been cycling in samsara since the beginning of this time. So we've accumulated many non-virtues. And if we haven't done the work to purify them, to overcome them, then those non-virtues will ripen. And in the same way, if we've ever had a moment of anger towards a bodhisattva, then that destroys eons of virtuous merit we've accumulated if we haven't already dedicated it away, right? And it creates eons of lower rebirths, or the seed for the eons of lower rebirths. So it's not just the virtue or non-virtue of this life we have to think about, but all the virtue and non-virtue of past lives as well, which is why purification is so important. And then the next section is the rarity of those obtaining the causes of the ledgers and the endowments. So Tsongkhapa reminds us, if you thus make sure to clear away and purify the causes of the lower ones accumulated earlier, and close the door to new engagement in them. So every day, engage in purification practice to purify any negativities that you've done today, as well as any you've done in this life that have not yet been purified, as well as any negative actions you've done in past lives, even if you don't have a memory of them, but is confident that you have done them because you are still a samsaric being. So you engage in that purification to purify the past negativities, and then at the same time, you engage in the proactive work, not following non-virtue in this life, right? Those two aspects, purify past misdeeds and seek out virtue. If you thus make sure to do these two things, then the happy realms should not be hard to reach. But in fact, they are still very hard to reach indeed. If you fail to do so, then you go to the lower realms. And once you've gone there, you do not create virtue, but you always commit negativities, and therefore do not even hear the name happy realms for many eons, as it says in engaging in the bodhisattva conduct. So this is just reminding us that simply practicing virtue and purifying non-virtue isn't enough. That's the most important part. But we also have to accumulate merit through practice of the perfections to the best of our abilities. And we have to make stainless prayers that will be reborn as a perfect human rebirth with access to Dharma, right? And with the merit to quickly meet a Mahayana virtuous friend. All of these things have to come together. And if you're born in a lower realm, you never even hear the term Dharma. So the difficulty is that being born in a lower realm is like a negative feedback loop. It's much more difficult to accumulate virtue when you're in a lower realm. You just create non-virtue after non-virtue. So it becomes, it makes it much harder to escape. It's not impossible. We definitely, all sentient beings will become Buddhas eventually, right? So when the right karma aligns and you purify the right things, then the right karma will ripen and you can be reborn again out of the lower realms. But it's much more difficult because of the amount of non-virtue that you create, especially as an animal, a hungry ghost, or a hell being. And now there's this quote from Kotowa, one of the Kadampa Geshes. And again, this quote, I don't really know what it means, to be honest. It's so hard, this Tibetan. It's so difficult to understand. And it's the exact same quote in the Lamrim channel. And Tsongkhapa gives the exact same lack of commentary on this quote. And I have read a half dozen different commentaries on both the Lamrim channel and the medium-length Lamrim. And in every single one, contemporary commentaries, that is, and in every single one, the Geshes just say, yeah, I don't know what this means. That's okay. Next time I'll figure it out. Because the Tibetan is really hard to understand. So we can get the essence, right? But if you have doubts about this, good, so do I. If you don't have doubts, please help me, because it's a very strange quote. So the quote from Potowa. So we have to keep in context. Tsongkhapa is reminding us why it's important to make the use of this perfect human rebirth, recognizing how difficult it is to achieve and how easy it is to lose. That's the context that he's giving us this quotation. And he says, Potowa says, in the region of Pen, which is a part of Tibet, actually be the part of Tibet where Lamrim is from. In the region of Pen, there was a solid fort by the name of Choe Khor that had been seized by an enemy. For a long time, the people that had been there became their poor servants. Then one old man used to be in anguish about this fort. And then one day, he heard that the people saying the fort had been won back. And he grabbed his spear because he was not able to walk, and he dragged himself along, saying, if only the capture of Choe Khor were not a dream. In the same way, having won the ledgers and endowments, you must also derive such joy from it and practice the Dharma. Not quite sure. What most geshes seem to say is they just focus on this last thing, right? That no matter your situation, you have won freedoms and endowments now. Maybe not perfectly, and there may still be many obstacles to your study and to your practice, right? However, you should exert every effort possible, no matter how old you are, no matter your situation, no matter how difficult it is. Even if you can't walk, but you have to drag yourself to the Dharma center, the conceptual Dharma center in this case, right? Then you should do that. In the same way, the old man drags himself using his spear because he can no longer walk, right? So we have to make the best use and celebrate every day how incredibly fortunate we are to have what we have, even if it feels like it's not enough, even if it feels like our life is filled with obstacles. Right? So if you can get more meaning from that, I'd invite it. I've looked at the Tibetan itself, as well as 3 different translations, and it's the same level of opaqueness in every one. So I apologize. So and then Tsongkhapa's only commentary says, in accordance with this statement, you should meditate in order to gain this kind of attitude, which is not very helpful if you don't understand the statement. And he gives the exact same commentary in the great treatise of the stages of the path of enlightenment. So what we need to take from this, again, is the importance of reflecting on how difficult it is to achieve a perfect human rebirth and how we should celebrate every day that we have something that is approximate to perfect human rebirth, no matter how difficult our lives and our experiences are. We should celebrate that and make the most of it every day. Right? And meditate on it, to actually meditate on how precious and how fortunate we are. I often think, I'll be at debate with some of my classmates and they'll be complaining about something. And I do this as well. So I'm not putting this on that I'm better than my classmates, but they'll be complaining. And I'll say, how fortunate are you to not only be a human being, but you're a monk and you're a monk that gets to study at Sergey. How much more benefit could you ever have? What do you have to complain about? Like, there's nothing to complain about. Yeah, the disciplinarians mean, okay. So what? You get to be a Sergey monk. That's ridiculous. Think of how many human beings don't have that opportunity, never mind non-human beings, right? And so obviously that's specific to those of us that are monks, but you can expand that out and just think of how many people in India, let's say, don't have access to a spiritual path that we have right now. For whatever reason, due to their community, due to their upbringing, due to their level of intelligence, due to whatever opportunities that aren't available to them. It's so rare, even within India, to be a human being that has access to the Dharma. And for instance, because the majority of Dharma is taught in either Tibetan or English, right? There is a push to translate these teachings back into Indian languages, but it's not exhaustive yet, right? There are still very few things taught in Kannada or Hindi, right? So on that basis alone, you could have the smartest person in India. If they don't know English, they have very little access to these teachings, right? And that's just India. Never mind, and that's just humans in India. So the fact that we have this access is incredibly, incredibly rare. And so whenever I personally am feeling upset about anything and I'm feeling bummed out, I remind myself how incredibly fortunate I am. No matter if it feels like the world is against me, I have access to this incredible insight that will actually lead me to liberation, that will lead me to Buddhahood if I let it. And that's so rare. And reminding myself of that genuinely, not just saying the words, but meditating on it and feeling it in my heart. Oh my goodness, how incredibly fortunate am I? Then that helps even when I'm feeling really down, when I'm feeling really upset, when I'm feeling like everything is working against me. It really is some of the best medicine that I have found to focus on how incredibly fortunate I am. So even though this is the really not counting how to rely on a guru, this is the first meditation topic in the Lamrim. It is incredibly important, right? So powerful to meditate on. And so then Shakamba continues. The four thoughts regarding the Dharma are necessary. Thus, four thoughts regarding the Dharma are necessary for the generation of a fully qualified wish to take the essence of this basis of leisure. So this basis of leisure is this human body that is down with the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments, right? It's often called a basis. We have the physical basis and the mental basis for practicing the Dharma. And so here the basis combines physical and mental. So he gives these four thoughts. The first thought, the need to accomplish the Dharma, because all sentient beings only want happiness and do not want suffering, and attaining happiness and eliminating suffering only depends on the holy Dharma. Number two, the ability to accomplish the Dharma, because you have the external condition, a spiritual teacher, and the internal condition, the leisures and the endowments. Number three, the need also to accomplish the Dharma in this life, because if you do not accomplish it within this life, it will be difficult to find the leisures and endowments in the future lives. And number four, the need to accomplish the Dharma right now, because the time of death is uncertain. So these four thoughts work together to encourage us to realize how incredibly precious this perfect human rebirth is and how it's important for us to use it. Now, you'll see a very similar series of thoughts when we get to meditating on death and impermanence, right? But the essence of these saying, I have to practice Dharma. I have the ability to practice Dharma now, both due to internal conditions and external conditions. And not only do I need to practice it and have the ability, I have to practice it in this life because there's no guarantee that I'm going to have the same level of resources in the future. And if I have to practice it in this life, I have to practice it right now because I have no guarantee how long I will continue to have the resources that I have available to me. So the third point counteracts the laziness of setting it aside, thinking, I will practice the Dharma in later lives. And the fourth point counteracts the laziness of not engaging in Dharma now, thinking, it needs to be accomplished in this life, but although it was not accomplished in earlier years and months and days, it is enough to accomplish it much later on. And therefore, it is admissible to combine these 2 points into one, and therefore you make 3 points. The last two subsumed under the idea of the need to accomplish it quickly. And like that, remembering death can also be linked in here. In any case, since this is a lengthy topic, it'll be explained below. So I won't go more into these now because the same or very similar topics are discussed when we get to death and impermanence. So next is the next topic in the outline is how to differentiate the different ways of sustaining meditation. This has 2 points. As the mind will be more significantly subdued if you contemplate the leisures and the endowments from various points of view, you should contemplate them as explained above. If you cannot do that, then you subsume them under the 3 points. 1, what the essence of the leisures and endowments is. 2, the manner in which they are greatly meaningful from a temporary and ultimate point of view. And 3, how difficult they are to find from the point of view of the cause, as well as the point of view of the effect. So, if memorizing all 18 and meditating on how precious perfect human rebirth is, based on understanding all 18, and how rare it is, and how would be no better than a dumb animal not to make use of it, if that type of meditation is difficult, then you combine all of that into 3 points. The first one is point to the essence of the leisures and endowments, which is to say how incredibly fortunate we are, right? So if you can't think of all 18 individually, think of their essence. And then from that, you say how the reason they are meaningful is because this basis is what allows us to achieve temporary and ultimate happiness, right? And then we need to remind ourselves of how difficult it is to achieve this basis. And here he says, from the point of view of cause and the point of view of effect. In the great treatise, we also talk about how rare and difficult it is also from the point of view of examples, right? So the point of view of cause is next. And it says, generally speaking, even for the attainment of mere happy realm, it is necessary to perform one of the pure virtues, such as ethics. In particular, for the attainment of complete leisures and endowments, you need many roots of virtue, such as taking hold of a basis through pure ethics, reinforcing it through generosity and the like, and making a connection by means of stainless prayers. In that case, it becomes apparent that those who accomplish such causes are very few, which is why you should think that, proportionately, the effect, the general and specific basis of the happy realms is difficult to find. So if we say the way to achieve the perfect human rebirth is to have stainless, perfect morality, as well as engaging in accumulation of merit through such activities such as generosity and having stainless prayers, if those 3 are necessary, how few people, including maybe ourselves, don't have those 3 in abundance in this life. So you look at the people that are not accumulating the causes, and that includes not just humans, but all the different types of sentient beings who are not accumulating those 3 specific types of cause. And you can realize then how rare it will be to take a rebirth of this type in the future, because those causes are so hard to accomplish, right? So that's looking at it from the point of view of cause. And then the next is to look at it from the point of view of the result. So it says here, you meditate on the fact that, from the point of view of the beings in the lower realms, those different in rank from us, so that is to say humans, but that don't have the same level of freedom and opportunity that we have. And even the mere happy realms seem hard to obtain. And from the point of view of beings in happy realms, those of the same rank, also those with the distinguished leisures, are extremely rare. So even those who are human, to be a human but to not have all 18 marks is extremely difficult. Geshe Drolpa had laid out great emphasis on this. He said that all other teachings come about brought on by this, and as it is like this, you should strive accordingly. So it's just reminding us that all of the practices that we want to engage in, they come about because we are motivated to practice the spiritual path. And our motivation to practice the spiritual path starts with recognizing how incredibly fortunate we are, that we have the capacity to practice the spiritual path that we have not had in the past, and we may not have again in the future if we don't do the work now. So we need to allow our recognition of this perfect human rebirth be the spiritual motivation to actually engage in Dharma practice. And then we learn how to take the essence of this perfect human rebirth. That's the next step, right? So we have to have this as the basis. Now, the other way to think of how rare it is, that he doesn't mention in this text, is we think of the rarity due to, so cause, how difficult it is to accumulate causes, effect, how many sentient beings are not human beings endowed with perfect human rebirth, right? Just so by number alone, there are far more sentient beings who don't have the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments than there are that do. And then the other example, or the other way of thinking of the rarity of a perfect human rebirth, is it's rare by means of example. And there are 4 examples that are normally given, or that are given in the Lamrim channel. Let's put it that way. The first is from the sutras, the example of the great turtle, which I'm sure many of you know. That if you think of the entire earth as if it were only one giant ocean, and in that one giant ocean there lived a sea turtle who was blind, and he only came up for air every 100 years. And on that ocean, who had these violent waves that were blown about by the winds of karma and illusion, there floated a single golden yoke, so the yoke that goes around an ox's neck. The likelihood of that turtle surfacing and then surfacing right in the center of that yoke is more likely than being born as human with the 8 freedoms and 10 endowments. So that's the first example. And that comes from Sutra. That comes specifically from teaching of the Buddha. The next example is the likelihood of dropping a bunch of mustard seeds onto a pin and having the mustard seeds land directly on the head of the pin and not fall to the ground. And then the third example is taking a bunch of chana or mutter, or peas that are dry, and throwing them at the wall. The likelihood of them sticking to the wall is greater than the likelihood of being reborn as perfect human rebirth. So there's not 4 examples, there's 3 common examples. The turtle throwing dry legumes at a wall or at a stone, and dropping mustard seeds on a pin. All of those are more likely than us having this opportunity of a basis of freedom and endowment, right? And those are silly to think about, right? They're very colorful. It almost feels like you're talking to a child. But we use examples like that because they're easy to remember. And they may seem silly, but if you actually trust these are the teachings of the Buddha, and he's using this example as a reason, then, and you meditate on it, it's much easier to grasp sometimes, right? Because it's very visual and it's very experiential. If I say visualize all the sentient beings that exist and recognize how many sentient beings aren't a human with the 8 and the 10, that's much harder to visualize, or for some people it is. Whereas if I give you this story about a sea turtle, that has some color, it has some flavor, and so they seem silly, but they're very easy to hold on to. So if you can get over the silliness of them, you see that they are pointing at something very profound. So you can't get lost in the finger that's pointing, and instead look at the object that's being pointed at, right? So that is the way we meditate on the perfect human rebirth being rare in terms of examples.
But now, generally look at the world around us. Most humans are not practicing these things, which means they have practiced it before, which is why they have come here as a human, but they are not generous, they are not, doing stainless prayer.
Yeah.
How do you explain?
So, I mean, the fact that they're born human with the privileges they have is due to the karma they practiced. So in the past, they have engaged in meaningful spiritual practice that has led them to accumulate the karma that allows them to ripen as a human. But they've also engaged in non-virtue in the past, and they haven't purified it. And as a result, when this life ripened, they may have ripened as a perfect human rebirth or a rebirth with many opportunities, but they also haven't done the work. So the imprints and seeds of the delusions are very strong, and they have allowed themselves to follow those. So it has to do with not purifying negative karma, right? Which just shows that causing the conditions to be reborn is important, but you also have to purify karma, so to get rid of the negative conditions. When we talk about karma ripening, right? Karma ripens not just in being reborn as a human or not. That's one type of karma, ripening karma. But karma also ripens as what we call completing karma. So it could be the karma that ripens and where you're born. the environment you're born into, the situation, the type of family, the type of wealth, the type of opportunity, but then also the type of habits that you have, right? So one of the most insidious types of karma is the karma that has a cause that is similar to the result, a result similar to the cause in habit. So someone who engages in the act of killing create a karmic, if they complete a full karmic act of killing, then they may have the karma to be reborn in a lower realm as a fruitional karma or projecting karma, but they'll also have the karma to be reborn in a place that is not that is devoid of resources. They'll also have the karma to be sick, to be an object of other people's violence, and more importantly, or not more importantly, but for me, one of the more insidious parts, they will have easy habit of engaging in killing again and again. So that's the ripening of the karma whose result is similar to the cause and habit. They'll already have the habit of killing. And so then the problem is that then that makes it so much easier to create negative karma, right, in the future, because you have that habit. So we can look around the world and we see people who have done the work to achieve a perfect human rebirth or something similar to it, and yet they waste it. And because they're wasting it, it is like the examples they gave of going to an island of jewels, going through all these difficulty and then ignoring it. Or another example they give is finding a jewel in a trash heap and then just leaving it there, right? You've done all this work to achieve what you've achieved, and yet you're throwing it away. And so when we realize that, with regard to other sentient beings, then it's an opportunity for us to practice compassion. Because we say you've done so much work, and now all you're doing is wasting it. All you're doing is seeking out suffering. So that is an opportunity to realize you are an incredible object of my compassion. Because you've worked so hard, and now you're running deeper and deeper into samsara. Right? Karma just doesn't, it's not like one karma ripening. There's always many different karmic seeds that are ripening at the same time. Ripening at the time of our birth and then continually ripening throughout our lives. All different karmic seeds. Some that we planted in this life, some we planted many lives ago, right? And that's why, engaging in virtuous practice is choosing, not only planting more virtuous seeds, but choosing which seeds we water, which seeds we give sunlight to, and which seeds we burn up and get rid of. So then the next point is how to take the essence of this perfect human rebirth. So here is when Tsongkhapa actually distinguishes the three types of beings, or the three scopes. So we've talked about these a lot, so we'll go through this section somewhat quickly. Famous last words, of course. This section has 2 points. The way in which the three types of beings practice the path, and a brief summary of the topics of the path in general. The first of these also has 2 points, generating certainty with regard to the general presentation of the path and the actual way of taking the essence of the path. The first one of these also has 2 points. How all the Buddhist teachings are contained in the path of the three types of beings, and giving the reasons for gradual guidance from the point of view of the three types of beings. The first of this has 6 points. 1. As everything the Buddha did in the beginning, the generation of the mind of enlightenment, in the middle, the accumulation of the collections, and at the end, the manifestation of complete Buddhahood, was done for the welfare of sentient beings only. All his Dharma teachings also only accomplish the welfare of sentient beings. That being so, the goal to be accomplished, the welfare of sentient beings, is twofold: temporarily high status and ultimate certain goodness. So there's the ultimate goal and the temporary goal. So temporary high status means being born with a perfect human rebirth. That's what we mean by the temporary goal. So the temporary objective, or the temporary objective is the objective of having high status. And here what that means is being born with a perfect human rebirth. And the ultimate goal is achieving certain goodness. And what certain goodness means is either liberation from samsara or Buddhahood. Right? So you could actually say there's the ultimate and the temporary ultimate, if you want it to be very specific. So the temporary ultimate would be achieve liberation from samsara for yourself, so moksha or nirvana. And then the ultimate is to achieve Buddhahood, which is to say, liberation of all, achieving perfectly Buddhahood. So not just elimination of the obstacles to liberation, but also of the obstacles to omniscience. So all of the Buddhist teachings have those two goals in mind: temporary and ultimate goals. As for the undertaking to attain the former, so as for the undertaking to achieve perfect human rebirth, everything that has been set forth is included in the actual cycle of teachings for lesser beings, or in the cycle of teachings common to lesser beings. Special lesser beings do not mostly act for the sake of this life, pursuing instead the excellence of high status in future lives and engaging in achieving the causes for that. In the Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, it says, "Whoever pursues by any means the happiness of samsara only, just for his own benefit, should be known as the least of beings." So here, this is teaching us the small scope, right? So Tsongkhapa points out that a small scope practitioner is not practicing for the happiness of this life, but is practicing to achieve quote unquote high status, which is to say a perfect human rebirth in future lives. That is the aim of the small scope practitioner. And he clarifies it is not just a small scope practitioner, but it's also, or the small scope teachings, but it's the teachings common to a small scope practitioner. So those teachings are not for small scope practitioners alone, right? That's something we have to always remember, is that all of these teachings are Mahayana teachings. They apply to Mahayana practitioners, but they're shared in common with small scope and medium scope practitioners as well, right? So they're not uncommon to the small scope. They're not uncommon to the medium scope. They're common, which is to say they are shared by great scope and small scope. He continues, there are two kinds of certain goodness. One, the liberation that is merely released from samsara, and two, omniscience. In this regard, everything that has been set forth, starting from the vehicles of the hearers and the solitary realizers, is included in the actual cycle of teachings for intermediate beings, or the cycle of teachings common to intermediate beings. So here, a medium scope, right? Intermediate beings develop disenchantment with existence as a whole. And existence is another term. It is mutually inclusive with the term for samsara. So intermediate beings, beings of the medium scope, develop disenchantment with samsara as a whole. And having made the liberation that is released from existence for their own welfare, their object of attainment, they engage in its method, the three trainings. In the Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, it says, indifferent to the pleasures of existence, one desists from evil deeds. Whoever pursues only personal peace is called an intermediate being, right? So what we have here is the description of the medium scope. So for the small scope beings, they have as their basis the practice of ethics and the practice for the avoidance of the 10 non-virtues, right? And so perfect human rebirth is necessary even to engage in a small scope practice. And then medium scope beings, people that have the goal of liberation from samsara, have as their practice, their uncommon practice, or rather their practice that is shared in common with the high scope or the great scope, is meditating on the nature of reality, so to overcome the afflictions, right? To overcome all of the afflictions to liberation, the nyundra, as well as their seeds. So in our topics here, generally what is taught is dependent arising, is taught as a medium scope practice, right? Whereas karma is taught as a small scope practice, for instance. And then lastly, we have the great scope. Oh, and renunciation, I guess you could also say, is critical for the medium scope, right? Because renunciation isn't just living a life that is avoiding the non-virtues, but it is living a life that is renouncing samsara. That's what it means to have renunciation, right? And so here he's saying regard to everything being set forth in the vehicles of the hearers and the solitary realizers. So we talk about the three vehicles, right? We have the Bodhisattva vehicle, but then also the Shravaka vehicle, which is to say the hearer vehicle, and the Pratyeka Buddha vehicle, or the solitary realizer vehicle. And each of those have 5 paths if we study grounds and paths and so on. The entryway into the Shravaka vehicle or the Pratyeka Buddha vehicle is having unfabricated renunciation. Until you actually develop that, you won't achieve the path of accumulation of one of the lower vehicles. So he's saying that that is the renunciation of samsara due to having disenchantment with existence. Here, existence means samsara. It's synonymous or mutually inclusive with samsara. Due to that, you develop renunciation, and that is the entryway into the lower vehicles. And so that is the entryway into the medium scope. Because the small scope don't have disenchantment with samsara. They have disenchantment with this life. They recognize that this life is not the goal, but they still are seeking out, to have a room in the prison that has a nicer view, as we said. And then he continues, how the great beings attain omniscience. So now we're on to the great scope. There are 2 means of attaining omniscience. The great vehicle, Mahayana, of secret mantra, and of the perfections. So that we often will say the perfection vehicle and the mantra vehicle, or tantra vehicle. And the perfection vehicle is sometimes called the sutra vehicle, right? Which are both underneath the Mahayana. These 2 are contained in the cycle of teachings of great beings. So the great scope. Since great beings are under the power of great compassion, having made enlightenment their object of attainment in order to bring all the suffering of sentient beings to an end, they train in the 6 perfections, the 2 stages, and so forth. The 2 stages being the generation stage and the completion stage of highest yoga tantra. In Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, it says, he whose own mind is affected by suffering, who thus yearns to bring to an end all the suffering of others completely, such one is a superior being. And the way this is a little bit of an incomplete translation, because really the first line should say, due to his own mind being affected by suffering. So the reason one develops compassion, which then becomes the cause of great compassion, which becomes the cause of bodhicitta, which becomes the entryway into the bodhisattva vehicle, which leads to Buddhahood, is because they recognize suffering in their own mind, right? And because of that, once they recognize suffering in their own mind, then they're able to develop empathy and recognize the suffering of other sentient beings. And through that, they'll develop the wish to free them from that suffering. As for the means by which these beings attain enlightenment, they are set forth under the 2 headings, perfection and mantra. The term 3 types of beings is mentioned in many texts, such as the Compendium of Determinations and the Treasury of Manifest Knowledge, Auto Commentary. Although with regard to lesser beings, there are both those who devote themselves to this life and those who devote themselves to future lives. This is about the latter. So there are, if we develop the rubric that says there are 3 types of beings, small, medium, and large, right? Or small, medium, and superior. You could argue that the beings that are dedicated to the benefit of this life, if you only have those 3 categorizations, they would be in the small, right? Because you have to put them somewhere. If you say all beings are split into 3, then they'd be in the small. But here this is saying that we're specifically talking about beings who are engaging in spiritual practice, and therefore we're not focusing on beings who are quote unquote small, but they are focused on this life only, right? So it's just recognizing that we're not focused on all sentient beings when we have this division into 3, but all beings who are engaging in meaningful spiritual practice is the distinction being made. So he continues. The next section is giving the reasons for the gradual guidance. So why is it that the Buddha taught these 3 different types of practice? And why did Atisha and other scholars then organize these different meditative techniques into this sequence? And why is it being taught as those techniques that are shared in common with small scope, those techniques shared in common with medium scope, and those techniques that are uncommon, right? So here we know the uncommon techniques start with the 6 perfections, and then they move on to the practice of Tantra. Why is it laid out that there should be a gradual or sequential teaching in this way? What is the purpose of guiding someone by means of the paths of the 3 beings? Thus, although it is explained in terms of the 3 beings, the path of great beings contains within it the paths of the 2 other beings, which is why the master Ashvaghosha says that these 2 are branches of the Mahayana path. So this here is not guidance on the path of lesser beings who make only the happiness of existence their object of attainment, nor is it guidance on the path of intermediate beings who make only liberation from samsara for their own benefit their object of attainment. Rather, some paths common to those 2 are considered to be preparatory practices leading to the path of great beings and are taken to be branches for training in the path of great beings. So we say this all the time, right? That these practices aren't separate from our practice. They are all part of our own practice, even though we are striving to be bodhisattvas, we are striving to achieve great compassion and bodhicitta. These aren't practices that are separate from us. They're contained within the Mahayana. And they're contained within the Mahayana because they lead to and instigate and empower our practice and our spiritual seeking and our spiritual engagement. So it's not just the Buddha taught these things, and therefore they're important conceptually. No, they're important to our life as people trying to practice the life of a bodhisattva. So then, giving the reasons for such gradual guidance, there are the actual reasons and then the purpose of giving these reasons. And there are 14 different actual reasons, at least as divided by Dharma. So the first, the entryway to the gate to the Mahayana. The entry gate for entering in the Mahayana consists in generating the mind set on supreme enlightenment. Once it has arisen in the mind, according to engaging in the bodhisattva conduct, when bodhicitta has arisen at once, the wretched bound in the prison of cyclic existence are to be called the children of those gone to bliss. For in accordance with this statement, individuals who have obtained the name bodhisattva are admitted among Mahayana beings. If their mind of enlightenment deteriorates, they leave the midst of the Mahayanists. So, what it means to actually enter into the path of the Mahayana practice. So the first path is to achieve bodhicitta, that an actual bodhicitta that is uncontrived. That's what it means to be a quote-unquote Mahayanist. So we are engaging in the practices of Mahayanist, but we haven't achieved the path, the Mahayana path yet, right? Or I haven't, I can't speak for you. But to achieve the Mahayana path is to actually achieve bodhicitta. And when you're on the path of accumulation, until you achieve the middling path of accumulation, you can actually, your bodhicitta can deteriorate, and then you can fall off the path. But once you achieve the middling path of accumulation, then your bodhicitta will no longer deteriorate. Right? So here he's saying, the language here, to be admitted amongst the group of, there's not like someone, there's not a bouncer at the door saying, you get in, you don't get in. It's just a matter of what level of realization you have. So it's the boundary marker for a level of realization and practice, right? There's not anyone who's punching tickets. Okay. It sounds like that. The language sounds like that. That's not what it means. It just is a marker for what level of spiritual progress you've made. And here the marker is actual bodhicitta. The one that precedes that, to actually awaken the lineage, how do you say? I don't know how to say in English. So we say all of us are Sangha. So we all exist in the family of Buddhas, right? In the lineage of Buddhas, because we all have the capacity to become Buddhas, and eventually we will all become Buddhas. And then, even though we exist or abide within the lineage of Buddhas, or the family of Buddhas, we don't yet abide in the lineage or family of Bodhisattvas or Mahayanists, because we haven't achieved bodhicitta. But to first awaken within us the lineage or family of Bodhisattvas or Mahayana, we have to achieve great compassion. So any being who has actual great compassion, so not just compassion that's focused on an individual, but great compassion that is focused on all sentient beings, wishing them to be free from all suffering. So it has as its object countless infinite sentient beings. That great compassion means you've awoken onto the path, or awoken the lineage of the Mahayana. It doesn't mean you've achieved the Mahayana path yet, because that takes bodhicitta, but it means you're no longer potential for one of the lower paths, right? So that's awakening into the lineage of a bodhisattva, or awakening into the lineage of a Mahayanist, and then actually achieving the lineage or the family of Mahayanist or bodhisattva is to achieve great bodhicitta. And it says once you achieve bodhicitta, you're given the name a child of a Sugata, one gone to bliss. So a child of the conqueror, a child of the Buddha, right? So in the same way, and really it says a son of the Buddha. And I know contemporary translators like to say child of the Buddha to be gender inclusive, but the imagery that is being used is, we say, in the same way as in ancient India, the lineage or the holder, the title of king would go to the son, to the princes. Then the title of Buddha will go to us because we've achieved the status of being sons of the conquerors, sons of the victors. So it doesn't actually matter your gender. What matters is that you've achieved the status of being next in line to become a Buddha because you have actually achieved bodhicitta. Now, that's because we're using the ancient Indian monarchy as our metaphorical example, which is why this is more accurately translated as a son of the Sugata, one gone to bliss. But we know children of the ones gone to bliss. I don't know if it's politically correct, but it kind of misses the metaphor a little bit. That's okay. No problem. The reason you're called that is because you are next in line. That's the important thing, right? You're next in line to become a Buddha because you are Bodhisattva. So the example is, or the comparison is, if you look at a kingdom, the king might have many trusted advisors and many ministers who may be very well learned, but they're not next in line to become king. So therefore, the king's young son is more powerful and more celebrated than even his most trusted advisor, because that young son or young child has a capacity and a proximity to becoming the king in a way that the ministers don't, right? So there's more to be celebrated in that than there is to be celebrated in being a great minister. So here, achieving bodhicitta brings us closer to Buddhahood than even achieving great intellectual understanding and success. And then he continues. If there are any burning questions, we can have time for questions now. But I think we can maybe continue and get through more of this section today, and leave questions until next week, unless there are some burning questions. So let me know. If there's something very important you need to ask now, we can do that. But otherwise, we'll continue to try to get through more of this section. And that way next week, we'll be able to jump right into death and impermanence. But please ask questions if you have them. But don't feel bad about asking questions. I'm not trying to discourage it. I just am recognizing that I talk slowly, or I ramble on and on, as we might say. So the next point, this being the case, so these 14 points of the actual reasons why we're guided through these sequential 3 stages. These subject lines, these titles, are inserted by Trijang Rinpoche, so I'm not going to read them. I'm just going to read Tsongkhapa's text, right? This division into 14 points is, the words are Tsongkhapa's, but these headings are not his. So I'm going to be skipping those. But it's useful for the purpose of memorizing. That's why we remember all 14. Once you know that there's a number, then it's easier to keep them in mind, right? But we'll just go over them a little more quickly. This being the case, those who wish to enter the Mahayana need to exert themselves in many ways to arouse that mind of bodhicitta. However, in order to arouse it, they first need to meditate on the benefits of arousing that mind and then allow delight with regard to those benefits to increase. They have to do the 7-line practice. They have to take refuge. That has been set out in the compendium of trainings and in engaging in the bodhisattva plan. So he's saying, if we want to achieve bodhicitta, that doesn't come out of nowhere, right? We have to do the work to achieve bodhicitta. which means we have to develop compassion. And to develop compassion, we have to develop great compassion, and we have to develop the special intention, right? That is one step above compassion. That says, not only do I want all sentient beings to be free from all suffering and all the causes of suffering, but it is my responsibility to free them. But in order to achieve that, we actually have to have refuge from the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And we have to understand what is virtue and not virtue. We have to have all these pieces to actually develop this. Now, it's possible that there are some people you might meet who have never heard a single teaching of the Buddha, and they're very compassionate people. I'm sure we have met those people, right? That's possible. But they're not going to develop the type of great compassion that leads to bodhicitta, because they don't have refuge from the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And in order to actually develop bodhicitta, you have to have refuge that recognizes the teachings of the Buddha are the only way to achieve Buddhahood, which is to say you have to have authentic mind of refuge, which is why refuge is taught first. If we summarize the benefits set forth in this way, there are two: temporary and ultimate benefits. The former, again, are twofold: not falling into the lower realms and being born in the happy realms. Once this mind has arisen, so again, the mind of bodhicitta, the causes of miserable existences accumulated previously are purified, and the continuity of those accumulated later on is cut. So all of our practices of purification become much more powerful when they're conjoined with bodhicitta, or even when they're conjoined with our approximation of bodhicitta. Which is why we say that we have the two accumulations of wisdom and merit, right? The practices associated with understanding emptiness and the practices associated with bodhicitta, compassion, and the perfections. Yet those don't exist in isolation, and they support one another. So all of the practices of purification, for instance, become more powerful when they're combined with bodhicitta, or our version, our attempts at bodhicitta. All of our attempts to meditate on emptiness become more powerful when it's combined with compassion and bodhicitta. And on the flip side, our practices of compassion and bodhicitta become more powerful when they're combined with an understanding of the nature of reality. The causes of happy realms accumulated previously, due to being conjoined with the mind of bodhicitta, increase extensively. And the ones that are newly created, due to being motivated by bodhicitta, become unlimited. When it comes to attaining the ultimate objectives of liberation and omniscience with ease through relying on this mind, if an uncontrived wish to achieve the temporary or ultimate benefits is not present, one may say, since those benefits arise from generating that mind, I will endeavor to generate that mind, but it will only be words. This will become very clear if we examine our mind. So here he's just saying we need to have actual meditation on development of bodhicitta. We just can't have an intellectual understanding that says bodhicitta is important, compassion is important, merit is important, practicing the 6 perfections are important. Understanding that intellectually, but not really believing it, not having a real realization of it, then it's just words, right? So we have to actually meditate on it and become convinced of it through our practice of reflection, and then meditate on it so it becomes inseparable from our mind. So that when we say bodhicitta is important, it's not just lip service, right? In order to develop the wish to attain those two benefits, high status and certain goodness, it is necessary to develop the attitudes common to lesser and intermediate beings. Having thus developed the wish to achieve the two benefits, when you cultivate the beneficial mind, it is necessary to develop the root of that mind, love and compassion. In this regard, if your body here does not shiver and quiver as you think about the way you yourself wander in cyclic existence, deprived of happiness and oppressed by suffering, there is no way the inability to bear how other sentient beings are deprived of happiness and oppressed by suffering can come about. Right? This is saying, if you yourself are not afraid of the sufferings of samsara, and just thinking about the way you yourself, even with a perfect human rebirth, suffer in samsara, if thinking about that doesn't cause you distress, doesn't cause you to immediately want to practice Dharma, then how could you ever contemplate the suffering of other sentient beings? If we say we want to wish all sentient beings to be free from suffering, you actually have to contemplate their suffering that you want to free them from. Just having to say, oh, wouldn't it be great if all sentient beings were happy? What is it you want them to be free from? So you have to actually think about their suffering. And the way you have empathy and recognize the depths of their suffering is by recognizing your own suffering. So what this is saying is, you have to practice renunciation, which is your own disillusionment with samsara, in order to develop compassion that wishes to free other sentient beings from samsara. So that's why I think of renunciation as self-compassion. If compassion is the wish for other sentient beings to be free from samsara, renunciation is the wish for me, myself, to be free from samsara. Therefore, it is self-compassion, right? That's the language I think of it as. So if I don't practice that self-compassion, it becomes very difficult to practice genuine compassion towards others. I can have moments of compassion, definitely. When you see a hungry animal, you wish they weren't hungry. Or you see someone with a broken leg, you wish they weren't suffering a broken leg. That's easy, right? But even that is based on your own experience of hunger, your own experience of physical pain. If you've never experienced the pain of a broken limb and you see someone with a broken limb, it would be nice if they didn't have that. But that's not the same thing as knowing what that pain feels like, right? So having renunciation is critical to developing actual compassion or great compassion. So he gives a quote from the Bodhicharyavatara that says, "In beings to whom up to now such thoughts, for even their own sake, have not occurred, not even in their dreams, how could it arise for others? For that reason, once you have thought about how, in the context of lesser beings, the harm of the suffering in the lower realms befalls you, and how, in the context of intermediate beings, even in rebirths of high status, there is suffering and no peace or happiness, meditation, in accord with your own experience on sentient beings who have become dear to you, becomes the cause for love and compassion to arise. Since the mind of enlightenment is born from love and compassion, training in the thoughts shared with lesser and intermediate beings is the means of generating the uncontrived mind of enlightenment." So, when you're developing the mind of a small scope being, you're meditating on the suffering of the three lower realms, because the object of attainment is birth as a human being, right? A high status birth, which is to say a perfect human rebirth. So you meditate on the suffering of the lower realms. But then when your goal is liberation, freedom from samsara, you meditate on the sufferings of the human and the god and the demigod realms, because even those are still in samsara. So those are how those meditations are separated, right? You meditate on different types of suffering depending on the object of attainment. And by doing that, you develop the empathy that is necessary to actually develop great compassion and great love for other sentient beings, which leads to bodhicitta. Efforts to purify and accumulate by many means through contemplating the taking of refuge, actions and their effects, which is to say karma, and so forth, in the context of the two paths of the small scope and medium scope, also constitute methods for training the mental continuum. That is, they are preliminary practices for the generation of the mind of enlightenment. Since they are part of the settlement practice along with taking refuge, they should also be understood as methods for generating the mind of enlightenment. Here, the spiritual master indicates how the teaching cycles of lesser and intermediate beings become branches for the arising of the mind of enlightenment. And the disciple also gains certainty in this regard. So here, when he says the master, he's saying a teacher indicates this, as well as who he mentioned earlier. Specifically, he mentions that these are considered branches, right? Which is to say, in this case, they are causes. Through recalling those points with each practice, you should thoroughly cherish this training. If you fail to do so, the path of great beings and the individual paths will become disconnected, as you would not gain certainty with regard to the mind of enlightenment until you reach the actual path of great beings. This would become an obstacle to the arising of that mind, or, meanwhile, the deterioration of that great objective. Therefore, you should persevere in this. What this is saying is, if you say that once I actually achieve bodhicitta, that's when I'll focus on bodhicitta, that's impossible. You need to develop confidence in the value of bodhicitta before you actually achieve it, because that's how you achieve it, right? And the way you develop confidence in bodhicitta and the importance of bodhicitta is by developing love and compassion. And those are dependent upon recognizing the suffering of other sentient beings, which is dependent upon engaging in the practices that are common to the medium scope and the small scope beings. So the order, the sequence of this has 2 points. Having trained in this manner, you should make the uncontrived mind of enlightenment arise in your continuum as much as possible. Then, in order to make it stable, first there is the uncommon way of taking refuge, and then the performing of the ritual of the aspiring mind of enlightenment. Having taken the aspiring mind of enlightenment by means of the ritual, practices trainings. Then, time and again, develop the wish to train in the conduct, the 6 perfections, the 4 ways of gathering disciples, and so forth. Once the wish to train in it has come forth, from the bottom of your heart, take the pure vows of engaging mind in the mind. So here, this is saying that before you take bodhisattva vows, you develop the taste of bodhicitta, right? And you develop approximate bodhicitta, and that itself comes from these other types of practice and confidence in them. And then you actually achieve the mind of bodhicitta. First, the approximation of it, then actual bodhicitta, independence on vows, having the vows. So again, there are 18 root vows, 46 branch vows of a bodhisattva. All of those are incredibly important to understand and to hold in your continuum, to magnify and increase your bodhicitta. So even beings like me, who don't have real bodhicitta, by having bodhisattva vows, I am aligning myself with the mind of bodhicitta, and I'm aligning all of my practices of body, speech, and mind with the activities of a bodhisattva, right? So the mind of the 18 root vows and 46 branch vows of the bodhisattva vows are all done to align your mind with the mind of the bodhisattva, right? And the practices of bodhisattva. Then even risk your life in order not to be tainted by a root downfall. So a root downfall, again, of those 18 root downfalls. Strive not to be tainted by small and medium contaminations or infractions either. So what this means, when we study the 18 root bodhisattva vows, in order for a root downfall to be complete, it has to have 4 components, right? In order to be complete, you have to believe that what you did was not wrong. So breaking this vow was not wrong. And then you have to not even have the thought that you will abandon this breaking of the vow again in the future. And you have to rejoice in your action of breaking the vow. And you have to have no shame or consideration for others in the breaking of the vow. And if you don't have those 4 pieces complete, it wouldn't be the complete breaking of the bodhisattva vow, with the exception of 2 of them. 2 of them, which is to say holding the wrong views, especially the wrong view that karma does not exist, karma and its results not exist, and the vow of never allowing your bodhicitta to degenerate for any sentient being. Those 2 bodhisattva vows don't require all 4 aspects to be a complete breaking of the vow. But the other 16, if you don't have all 4 of these, then that is what he's referring to a small or medium contamination. So a complete breaking of the root vow would have all 4 of those. And then a medium or a small contamination might have 3 or 2 of those 4 aspects. So he's saying that he's saying you should risk even your life. Now we know that we shouldn't actually put our lives on the line because it's so difficult to achieve perfect human rebirth that until we've achieved higher levels of realization, then we shouldn't be willing to actually give up our life. But we use that as a metaphor to say how important the bodhisattva vows are. However, if you do get tainted by the breaking of any vow, either a small or medium or complete breaking of a bodhisattva vow, then you should purify it well by means of what has been expounded with regard to the countermeasures for the downfalls. That is to say, the 4 and the 4 opponent powers. And then you train in the 6 perfections in general, and especially in the perfection of concentration, which is to say the entity of calm abiding, in order to make the mind serviceable with respect to whatever virtuous conduct you wish. The statement in the Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment that you train in calm abiding in order to develop clairvoyance is only as an example. So in the Path to Enlightenment, in a teacher's text, he says the reason for achieving calm abiding is to achieve one of the clairvoyances. There are these number of different clairvoyant minds, and that's just an example. That's not the only reason you achieve that, right? So Tsongkhapa is saying that we need to achieve calm abiding because that makes our mind serviceable to engage in a complete practice of all the 6 perfections and to purify all negativities and to make our compassion, our love, and our bodhicitta even more profound. Atisha himself stated on other occasions that achieving calm abiding also serves to develop special insight, and therefore you should develop calm abiding also for that purpose. Then, in order to cut the bonds of apprehending the 2 selves, the self of persons and the self of phenomena, decide on the meaning of emptiness by means of the view, sustain the mode of meditation flawlessly, and accomplish the entity of wisdom, which is to say special insight. So here he's reminding us that achieving clairvoyance may be one of the results of calm abiding. But really, calm abiding is also leading us towards special insight. And from special insight, then we develop direct realization of emptiness. And then that is how we actually get rid of all of our delusions. Okay, so I'm going to stop here because it's after 7. I went through that quickly. And next time, we'll probably go through these next pages quickly as well, so we can start on perfect human rebirth. And so I encourage everyone to prepare for next week's class, to read the section on perfect human rebirth. Excuse me, death and impermanence. I apologize. Death and impermanence, which is the next topic. I encourage us all to read that. If there are any questions of anything we've gone over, especially these last parts that I've gone over very quickly, even if it's a question on vocabulary or the specifics that Tsongkhapa is pointing at, don't hesitate to ask me to bring them up next week. We can have it at the top of class if we need to. In all of our study, I want us to remember that Tsongkhapa is giving us this very specific, detailed instruction, not so we can become professors, but so that can motivate our practice. That's the important part. So these details, every individual specific detail may not be important for your personal practice, but the reason Tsongkhapa gives them is because they add together to make your personal practice more profound, deeper, and to have more perspective to it, right? So whenever we study this text, it may seem like he's giving all this meaningless detail and all this redundant detail, but it's not purposeless. It's all done for the purpose of engaging and empowering us to engage in meaningful practice. So always keep that in mind when you study a text like this, or any text, but specifically a text like this, that even though it may seem like these small details that aren't the most important thing, they all add up to performance of practice. So let's leave it there. I apologize for going a little late. So we'll end with some brief dedication prayers today. Let's go to page 260, 250 something. Hold on. 235. That's where we're going. Sorry. It's been a while since I've used the book. So we'll do these first 5 verses in English, okay? Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel of bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Just as the brave Manjushri and Samantabhadra too realize things as they are, I too dedicate all these merits in the best way, that I may follow their perfect example. I dedicate all these roots of virtue with the dedication praised as the best, by the victorious ones thus gone of the 3 times, so I might perform good works. I dedicate whatever virtues I have ever collected for the benefit of the teachings of all sentient beings, and in particular for the essential teachings of perfect pure Losamjarpa to shine forever. And let's just jump to page 244, and we'll do the short long life prayer for Swanas Dalam. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig, Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. Thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate all of you spending time with me today, whether you're here in person or with me digitally. I'm glad that I had a chance to come back to Bangalore. So we'll continue next week. We'll be online only next week, but it's worth pointing out that next week is Wheel Turning Day. So one of the 4 holidays, next Saturday, July 18th, is the 4th of the 6th Tibetan month, which is to say it is Wheel Turning Day. So it's a very auspicious day for us to study and practice together. So I look forward to all of you joining me on that day. Thank you.